Shalom and welcome to Shikul Da'at. I'm Rabbi Josh Rose. A fascinating little story in our Torah portion contains a very powerful teaching about happiness and spiritual consciousness, and it involves snakes. Here's the setup. The Israelites are moving through the wilderness. They pass close by the land of Israel, and then Moses leads them back in the other direction. And then this. Vayisu mehor hahar derech Yam Suf, lisvov et haaretz Edom, v'tiktzar nefesh ha'am baderech. They set out from Mount Hor by way of the Sea of Reeds to skirt the land of Edom. But the people grew restive on the journey, or impatient on the journey. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why did you make us leave Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread and no water, and we have come to loathe this miserable food. Vayishlach Hashem ba'am et nachashim hasarafim, vayinshachu et ha'am, vayamot amrav mi Yisrael. God sent seraph serpents against the people. They bit the people, and many of the Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Intercede with the Lord to take away the serpents from us." And Moses interceded for the people. What is this? Punishment for complaining? Snakes? What kind of theology are we dealing with here? It seems kind of brutal. But there's a revelation contained in this passage, and in one word in particular. This is one of those cases where grammar and the vowels really matter. So bear with me here because I want to go on a little bit of a tangent, but it's actually pretty fascinating. So the verb vaishalach is often translated as sent, and that's how the translation that I just read has it. But according to the Akedat Yitchak, a 14th century rabbi, it does not mean that. It actually means released. So the two possibilities are God sent seraph serpents against the people, or God released seraph serpents against the people. And actually, these two translations each imply a very different theology and very different lessons for us. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but let me explain why there is this ambiguity at all. Remember that the Torah itself does not contain any vowels, so we can't tell just by looking at a word, and that word in particular, whether it should be vayishlach, sent, or vaishalach, released. I don't know if you can hear the difference there. It's very subtle. Vayishlach, vaishalach, which is sent or released. Because the spelling of the word, which is Vav, Yud, Shin, Lamed, Chet, as it appears in the Torah, would allow for either one of those. They're spelled with exactly the same letters. So how do we know the pronunciations? People known as Masoretes, which means something like tradition carriers, were scholars and scribes who between the 6th and 10th centuries determined how the Torah should be pronounced based on grammatical rules, convention, and tradition. So if you come to shul on Shabbos, and hear, that is tomorrow, and hear the Torah read, you'll find that the word is read as vaishalach. And the Akedat Yitzchak commentary that I mentioned earlier believes that this means released. Okay, so now let's talk about why this is important. If God sent snakes in response to the Israelites' complaint, it sounds like things were fine and snakeless, and then God, out of anger, decided to make some snakes and send them towards the Israelites as a punishment. Okay, that would be one lesson and one theology about maybe God's anger and consequences of bad behavior and punishment, but I don't really know, to be honest, what to do with that in my life. But if it means released, it's very different, because then it suggests that the snakes were there the whole time, but somehow they were being held back. The Israelites complain, and then boom, God decides to stop holding back the snakes and let them kind of do their natural snake thing. So on a simple level, this makes sense. They're in the wilderness. There are a lot of snakes there. In fact, why haven't we been hearing more about snakes in the book of Bamidbar, which actually means in the wilderness? So they're walking through the desert. Why aren't there snakes? But more profoundly, there is a deep theological statement that the Akedat Yitzchak and others who see this as meaning released, God's releasing the snakes, are trying to get to, and it's that I want to explore. The Israelites have been subsisting on miracles the entire time. Yes, things have been difficult, but they are literally sustained by miracles. They have food whenever they need it because God miraculously supplies them with the manna. When they need water, it comes to them by way of miracle, as earlier in this Torah portion, when it comes out of a rock. And let's not forget that they were taken out of slavery by miracle, with 10 plagues overturning the most powerful empire in that area. But all they can see is their frustration. It's interesting that there are other moments when the Torah says something like, there was no water to drink, as a setup for the complaints of the Israelites, like kind of like a journalistic verification of the condition on the ground. There was no water, that is the truth, and then the Israelites complain. That happens in our Torah portion. It happens elsewhere in the Torah. But here, in the passage that we're discussing, the Torah does not say that. They're complaining about water and food, but it actually seems like they do have both of those things. So most commentators explain this by pointing out that the Israelites had come very close to the land of Israel, and now they were turning in the other direction, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. The proximity to what they really wanted has made them impatient and frustrated. And in addition to that, the Torah itself tells us that the miracle of the manna has kind of lost its luster. As they point out, they want bread. They're acknowledging they have manna, but it's boring. Yes, it sustains them, but they want something more. In other words, what they have is not enough, or rather, they don't see that what they have is enough. They're no longer taking note of the miracle that they're alive at all. And this is perhaps the gravest spiritual danger, the one that is at the root of so much negativity and unhappiness in our lives. So, God halts one of the miracles that God has been performing. God has been holding back the snakes that naturally should have been coming after the people the whole time. So now they become aware that they are being upheld by miracles. That's God's design anyway. In other words, the fact that they had not been suffering should have been a source of joy and happiness. That's kind of a weird way to say it, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point that I'm making. And they turn their lack of suffering into a source of dissatisfaction because it's not enough. Sound like anyone you know? How many times have you said, ugh, this coffee is terrible, rather than thinking, wow, some worker in Guatemala, who's probably terribly underpaid, by the way, did the hard work of harvesting these beans, and then someone else took them and roasted them and sent them to someone else who shipped them from Central America, so they wound up here, and then they were distributed to Portland, and then the nice folks at this coffee shop ground them and got up early to get here, and then drawing on all of the training that they did, made me this hot cup of coffee, which I get for only $2.50. Of course, this is kind of silly example, but we can see how that attitude prevents us from absorbing the beauty that God is constantly radiating into the world for us. Each morning, we recite blessings that you can find in any traditional prayer book. We often call these, for obvious reasons, the morning blessings, but actually they go by another name in Hebrew, Nisim B'chol Yom, which means daily miracles, or even more literally and evocatively, miracles that are in each day. These are the ones in which we thank God for allowing us not to be naked, to have clothes, to stand up straight, for making us healthy enough to go to the bathroom, and many more. And these simple blessings that we might not even notice in the prayer book anymore are actually teaching us something very profound. There are snakes all around, so to speak, and we should take notice. While we can't live lives dominated by fear of what might have happened or what might happen. We don't want to be in that mindset. That wouldn't be any life at all. But having an appreciation for what has not befallen us allows us to be filled completely for gratitude for the things that we do have. This has both practical and spiritual implications. Practically, maybe this teaching can allow us to stop chasing happiness by looking for that next fix. I need one more cup of coffee to feel good. One more Facebook post and then I'll feel like I have enough. One more shirt. One more night out with friends. One more great Hulu show to binge watch. But it's never enough. We know that. Our lives are already filled with blessings, and our happiness can only be found in recognizing that. Spiritually, the teaching is that each moment is already filled with divine bounty. God is actively engaged right now in bestowing goodness on you. You are being guarded and kept alive. You're being sustained. And each moment, when we see it like this, is filled with the embrace of divine love. Let's look up from what we want in order to see what we have. Have a good Shabbos, and thank you so much for listening.